Welcome, cherished viewers, to Family Secrets Unveiled, where we delve into the hidden corners of history, unearthing tales that refuse to stay buried. Tonight, we have a story so steeped in shadow and whispered truths that it promises to chill you to the bone. It's a narrative that begins with an object seemingly innocuous, yet holding within its delicate embrace a secret so profound, so utterly unsettling, that it rewrites the very fabric of a family's legacy. Imagine, if you will, an old locket, tarnished with the patina of decades, its surface smooth from countless touches, yet its true weight not in its metal, but in the burden of what it contains. Our journey begins with Clara, a woman whose life had, until recently, been a tapestry woven with the threads of predictability and quiet contentment. Clara was in her late 40s, with eyes that held the warmth of a hearth fire and a smile that rarely faltered. She had built a comfortable life, a haven of order and gentle routines, a stark contrast to the turbulent world her story would soon unveil. Her grandmother, Elara, had passed away a few months prior, leaving behind a small, unassuming house filled with memories and, as Clara was about to discover, a legacy of silence. Elara had been a woman of enigmatic grace, her past veiled in a quiet reserve that Clara had always attributed to the natural reticence of her generation. She was a storyteller, yes, but her tales always focused on the whimsical, the light-hearted, never venturing into the deeper, darker currents of her own life. Clara remembered her grandmother's hands, gnarled with age, always busy, always moving, as if trying to outrun something unseen. The task of sifting through Elara's belongings fell to Clara, a bittersweet journey through a life lovingly lived. Amongst the antique furniture, the faded photographs, and the scent of lavender and old paper, Clara found a small, silver locket tucked away in a velvet box in the bottom of her grandmother's cedar chest. It wasn't an heirloom she recognized, nor did it bear any inscription that would tie it to a familiar branch of their family tree. The locket was remarkably heavy for its size, almost uncomfortably so. As she held it, a strange chill permeated the warmth of the room, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, as if a window to another time had briefly creaked open. There was an unsettling stillness about it, a silent sentinel guarding an untold truth. Curiosity, a potent and often dangerous companion, compelled Clara to open it. Her fingers, trembling slightly, fumbled with the clasp. It opened with a soft click, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room, a sound that, retrospectively, felt less like an opening and more like the breaking of a long-held seal. Inside, nestled against the aged metal, were not the miniature portraits of loved ones, not a lock of hair, nor a pressed flower, but something far more visceral, far more disturbing. Two tiny, perfectly preserved baby teeth. Their pearly white surface, though dulled by time, was unmistakable. Clara gasped, a small, choked sound that was lost in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile this macabre discovery with the image of her sweet, gentle grandmother. Who did these teeth belong to? Why were they kept in such a sacred, hidden place? And why, oh why, had Elara never spoken of them? This wasn't just a quirky family heirloom, this was a mystery, a raw, unsettling fragment of a past that now demanded to be understood. The weight of the locket suddenly felt unbearable, not just in her hand, but in the unsettling knot that was beginning to form in the pit of her stomach. The quiet life she knew was about to be irrevocably shattered, and the gentle whispers of her grandmother's past were about to transform into a chilling, desperate scream. This seemingly innocent discovery was not an end, but merely the chilling overture to a symphony of long-buried secrets. The discovery of the baby teeth in Elara's locket plunged Clara into a vortex of unease, shattering the serene image she held of her grandmother. The initial shock gave way to a persistent, gnawing curiosity, a desperate need to understand the meaning behind such a macabre keepsake. Who were these children, and what tragic circumstances led their tiny teeth to be enshrined in a locket, rather than their memories openly cherished? The silence surrounding Elara's past now felt less like a gentle reserve and more like a deliberate, suffocating shroud. Clara found herself revisiting old photo albums, scrutinizing every faded face, searching for a hint, a flicker of recognition, a shadow that might connect to this unsettling revelation. But every smile was innocent, every gaze unburdened, offering no clues to the chilling mystery. Days turned into weeks, and the locket became a constant companion in Clara's thoughts. It lay on her bedside table, a silent accuser, demanding answers. She started to notice small, unsettling details she had previously overlooked. The way Elara would sometimes pause mid-sentence, her eyes distant, as if listening to an unheard whisper. The faint scar on her grandmother's left wrist, always hidden beneath a bracelet, now seemed to pulse with an unspoken story. Clara remembered a recurring dream Elara had often mentioned, one of a child crying in the rain, a dream Elara would always dismiss with a wave of her hand and a forced chuckle. Now, these fragments of memory coalesced into a disturbing pattern, hinting at a pain too profound to be openly acknowledged. Driven by an insatiable need for truth, Clara began to meticulously search Elara's house, not just for sentimental items, but for anything that might shed light on the locket's secret. She delved into dusty attics and forgotten corners of the cellar, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. It was in the false bottom of an old sewing box, hidden beneath decades of forgotten spools of thread and thimbles, that she found it, a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, its ink faded, but the handwriting, unmistakably Elara's, was elegant and precise. This wasn't a diary of daily events. It was a chronicle of pain, a lament, a confession written in a desperate hand. The journal revealed a side of Elara Clara had never known, a young woman consumed by a sorrow so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. The entries spoke of a forbidden love, a clandestine affair with a man named Thomas, a man who was already married. Elara, then barely 20, found herself pregnant, a scandalous revelation in the rigid societal norms of the 1930s. The entries detailed her desperate attempts to hide her condition, her shame, and her overwhelming fear. Thomas, consumed by his own fear of social ruin, abandoned her, leaving Elara utterly alone to face the consequences. The weight of the words pressed down on Clara, making the air in the room thick and heavy. Then came the entry that made Clara's blood run cold. Elara had given birth to twins, 2 fragile baby girls, premature and weak. The delivery was fraught with complications, the setting a secluded, run-down cabin far from prying eyes, assisted only by an elderly, silent midwife. The journal described the agonizing days that followed, the desperate struggle for survival, and the heartbreaking realization that the twins were fading. Elara's words painted a vivid, agonizing picture of a mother's despair, her pleas to a silent God, her futile attempts to keep her daughters alive. One by one, the entries recounted the slow, agonizing decline, until a chilling passage detailed the moment Elara woke to find one of her babies, still and cold, in the makeshift cradle. The next day, the other followed. Their tiny teeth, Elara had written in a trembling hand, the only perfect things left of them. I kept them, a piece of them to hold, for I could not even give them a proper burial. Clara reread the passage, her vision blurring with tears. The baby teeth. The locket. It all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Her gentle grandmother, the storyteller, had carried this unimaginable grief, this unspeakable secret, for a lifetime. But the journal ended abruptly, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. There was no mention of where the babies were buried, no indication of what happened to the midwife, no resolution to Elara's immense suffering. The story of her hidden heartbreak was profoundly revealed, yet the chilling absence of detail about the twins' resting place and the lingering ambiguity around their final moments only deepened the sense of an unresolved tragedy. Clara felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the unknown babies, but for the grandmother she thought she knew, whose life now seemed to be a monument to unspoken sorrow and unimaginable sacrifice. The locket, once a symbol of macabre curiosity, now pulsed with the raw, untamed grief of a mother, and Clara knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning of Elara's story. The revelation of Elara's lost twins, chronicled in the heart-wrenching journal, sent a tremor through Clara's very being. The innocent baby teeth in the locket were no longer just a mystery. They were a testament to a mother's unspeakable grief, a tangible link to a tragedy that had been deliberately erased from family history. But the journal, as raw and painful as it was, left a gaping void. Where were the twins buried? What became of the midwife? And what truly happened in that isolated cabin, a place now shrouded in the deepest shadows of Elara's past? Clara felt an overwhelming compulsion to find these answers, to give voice to the silenced lives of her grandmother's lost children. It was a burden she now carried, a sacred trust passed down through generations, demanding resolution. Clara returned to the journal, poring over every word, every subtle detail, searching for any clue that might lead her to the cabin or the midwife. The entries were sparse on geographical specifics, detailing only the lonely woods and a small, forgotten clearing. It was a puzzle, intricate and heartbreaking, but Clara was determined. She began to research local historical records, focusing on the time period Elara had referenced. She delved into old property deeds, birth and death records, anything that might connect to a secluded cabin or an unregistered birth. The search was painstaking, yielding little beyond a growing sense of frustration and the chilling realization of how easily lives could vanish without a trace in those simpler, yet harsher, times. Then, a flicker of hope emerged. Tucked into the back pocket of the journal, almost an afterthought, Clara found a faded, brittle newspaper clipping. It was a small announcement, barely a paragraph, from a local paper dating back to the late 1930s. It reported the sudden, unexplained disappearance of a midwife named Agnes Finch, who had lived on the outskirts of what was then a sparsely populated rural area. The article mentioned Agnes was known for assisting women in difficult circumstances, a euphemism that sent shivers down Clara's spine. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Agnes Finch. Could this be the silent midwife Elara had mentioned? Her sudden disappearance, so conveniently timed with Elara's tragedy, felt too coincidental to ignore. It hinted at something far more sinister than a simple abandonment. Clara's research led her to the forgotten section of the county archives, a dusty room filled with microfiches and ancient ledgers. She cross-referenced Agnes Finch's name with local property records, painstakingly scrolling through endless rolls of film. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, she found it, a small plot of land, abandoned for decades, once owned by an Agnes Finch. The description of the property, nestled deep within a heavily wooded area, matched Elara's vague journal entries of the lonely woods. Clara felt a jolt of both dread and exhilaration. She had found the cabin, or at least where it once stood. Armed with old maps and a compass, Clara ventured into the woods, the air growing colder, the shadows deeper with every step. The journey was arduous, the undergrowth thick, as if nature itself was trying to guard the secrets held within. After hours of pushing through brambles and navigating by instinct, she stumbled upon it, a clearing, eerily silent, dominated by a crumbling stone foundation and a few rotting timbers, all that remained of the cabin. The sense of isolation was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken history. As she stood amidst the ruins, a profound sadness washed over her, a tangible connection to Elara's suffering. Then, her eyes caught something. Not on the surface, but just beneath a thin layer of fallen leaves and pine needles, near what would have been the cabin's back wall. A small, roughly carved stone, barely visible, half buried in the earth. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knelt, clearing away the debris with trembling hands. On the stone, faintly visible, were two tiny, crudely etched initials, M.A. and L.F. No dates, no epitaphs, just these two sets of initials, a silent testament to two forgotten lives. This was it. This was where Elara's twins, Mary Agnes and Lily Frances, lay buried, their existence marked only by these secret stones. But as Clara wept, a new, chilling thought pierced through her grief. The entries in Elara's journal, while detailing the twins' fading health, never explicitly stated how they died, only that they followed each other in death. The sudden disappearance of Agnes Finch, the midwife, now felt less like a convenient coincidence and more like a deliberate act. The sheer isolation of the cabin, the lack of any official record of the births or deaths, the deliberate secrecy, it all pointed to something darker, a possibility that made Clara's blood run cold. Could there be more to the story than a natural, tragic death? A profound chill, colder than the forest air, enveloped her. The silence of the woods felt less like peace and more like a deliberate suppression, as if the very trees were complicit in guarding a horrifying truth, a truth that might be far more brutal and intentional than a mother's broken heart. The locket had led her to the grave, but the grave itself was now whispering a new, more sinister question, a question that hinted at a betrayal far greater than any Clara could have imagined. The discovery of the makeshift graves for Mary Agnes and Lily Frances, marked only by their tiny, etched initials, brought Clara a bittersweet sense of closure, yet simultaneously intensified the chilling questions surrounding her grandmother's past. The air in the clearing, once heavy with historical sorrow, now felt electric with unspoken malevolence. Agnes Finch's disappearance, Elara's vague journal entries about the twins' deaths, and the sheer secrecy of it all coalesced into a terrifying possibility. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister had transpired in that desolate cabin. The silent burial site, far from official records, seemed to scream of deliberate concealment. Clara spent days processing the weight of this new suspicion. She returned to the journal, reading between the lines, re-examining every word. She noticed a subtle shift in Elara's writing after the initial entries about the twins' births and early struggles. A new tone of frantic fear, a brief, almost whispered mention of Agnes's temper and her demands. It was faint, easily overlooked, but now, armed with the knowledge of Agnes's disappearance and the isolation of the cabin, it painted a terrifying picture. What if the midwife hadn't just assisted Elara, but had exerted control, perhaps even blackmail? Clara began to research historical cases of infanticide or forced adoptions during that era, particularly in rural, isolated areas where such tragedies could be easily hidden. The stories were heartbreaking, illustrating the desperate measures women would take, or be forced to endure, to conceal out-of-wedlock pregnancies. A particularly disturbing case in a neighboring county, involving a midwife accused of profiting from problem babies, caught Clara's attention. The details were eerily similar: isolated cabins, disappearances, and the convenient lack of official records. Could Agnes Finch have been involved in something similar? Could she have seen Elara's desperation as an opportunity, not just for assistance, but for something far darker? The final, chilling piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, an old, yellowed letter found tucked within a rarely opened book of poetry that had belonged to Elara. It wasn't addressed to Elara, but to her, from an old friend of Elara's, dated many years after the twins' tragedy. The friend, seemingly in a moment of distress, confessed to Elara that she had always suspected something about that Agnes Finch, mentioning a rumor that Agnes had once taken a baby and vanished, only for the child to mysteriously reappear years later with a different family. The letter was vague, hinting at a darker understanding between the two women, a shared secret too dangerous to speak aloud. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. Elara's journal entries, initially interpreted as a mother's grief, now took on a terrifying new meaning. The fading of the twins, the lack of explicit details about their deaths, Agnes's temper and demands, and her subsequent disappearance. Clara realized with a sickening lurch that her grandmother hadn't simply lost her babies to illness. Agnes Finch, seeing an opportunity in Elara's desperate and vulnerable state, had likely taken the twins, either to sell them to childless couples for profit or, even more horrifyingly, to dispose of them to protect her illicit operations. Elara, devastated and alone, with no proof and no power, could do nothing but grieve in silence, keeping the only physical remnants of her children, their tiny teeth, in a locket, a silent, heartbreaking vigil. She had buried empty coffins, or perhaps nothing at all, at the site, a desperate act to honor the lives she had lost or had been stolen from her. The discovery of the initials MA and LF now felt less like a marker of a grave and more like a desperate, defiant act of remembrance, a silent rebellion against the erasure of her children's existence. The true horror wasn't just the loss of the twins, but the brutal silence Elara was forced to endure, carrying the weight of this knowledge, this unspeakable injustice, for decades. She had lived a life haunted by the ghost of a choice she never made, a future stolen, a maternal instinct brutally suppressed. The quiet grace Clara had always admired in her grandmother was not just reserve, it was the stoic resilience of a woman who had faced unimaginable cruelty and had been forced to bury not just her children, but the truth itself. Clara stood in the quiet of her living room, the locket now a symbol not of mystery, but of a profound, devastating truth. Her grandmother, Elara, was not just a woman of sorrow, but a survivor of a monstrous secret, a victim of a cruel system that preyed on the vulnerable. The discovery had stripped away layers of comfortable illusions, revealing a raw, tragic history. It was a story of a mother's unbreakable bond, a desperate act of remembrance, and the chilling silence that can swallow truth whole. And that, my friends, is the haunting tale of Elara's Locket. A story that reminds us that sometimes the most profound secrets aren't buried in hidden chambers, but whispered in the silence of a grieving heart, carried for a lifetime, waiting for a compassionate ear to finally uncover them. If this story has resonated with you, if it has sent a shiver down your spine or stirred a forgotten memory, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Family Secrets Unveiled, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chilling dive into the past. Join us again as we continue to unearth the hidden truths that refuse to stay buried. Until next time, stay curious and remember, every family has its secrets.